Very good. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the National Association of District Export Councils today and our webinar entitled Freight Disruption in the Global Supply Chain is certainly a topic that nearly every exporter is needing to deal with at this time. I have to say that we have over 150 registrants into this webinar, which is an outstanding number, and we do appreciate all of your involvement and interest. Um, Before I introduce Tom Cook from Blue Tiger International, who will be your moderator, I wanted to let everyone know that we would like for you to hold your questions until after Tom Cook has addressed prepared questions to the panel, and you will be able to use the question and answer um, capability on the Zoom screen here. So with that, I would like to say welcome and thank you to Tom Cook from Blue Tiger International. And I know, Tom, you'll introduce all of the distinguished panel members today. So with that, I'll pass the baton over to you, Tom Cook.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it very much. Let me pull up a slide deck so that we can get that moving here. So again, thanks to the panel that we have put together of 7 seasoned experts in global supply chain and the audience for participating. So we have Michael Pisa, Jason Manganaro, Joe Mantello, Louise Cosner, Matt Safferty, and James Setsky, and also Sean Levison. The last slide that we'll show will have their email addresses. They've all agreed to be able to be reached by any of you if you have any specific questions for them as at the end of the panel discussion. So what our intent to do in this subject that's almost impacting everybody involved in global supply chain and even in domestic supply chain today is we want to frame the issues, and framing the issues gives us a kind of a clear view of what they are. Discuss the global supply chain as respects to this disruption and its interference with every one of us trying to do our day-to-day jobs. And then lastly, to look at what some of the solutions that some companies have applied, some carriers have applied, and some of the service providers have applied, along with the various strategies that can be used to help deal and mitigate the impact of the disruption. I don't think anybody would ever pose the issue that we can eliminate the issues around this disruption, but we can take steps to mitigate, and that's critical. In the American Shipper magazine this past week, there was an article which had this picture, and the title of the article was, "Are you shipping me $32,000 container move from China to Los Angeles?" And I saw this on LinkedIn as well, where one of the supply chain managers of a company said, this is frankly what he's dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And one of the bigger issues around this circumstance is that this problem is not getting better, it's getting worse. All started from when COVID hit us in February, March of last year. So I kind of framed what I think are the primary issues, and I recognize that with all the supply chain people who might be listening in here, that some of the problems might be a little bit more customized and there might be more issues that you're dealing with. But we think these are the ones that are facing most of the companies involved in global trade. And this doesn't make a difference whether you're importing or exporting and or you're moving goods domestically. The first issue is the delays that's involved in trying to move freight successfully within a reasonable time frame. This is all caused by the fact that there's a huge gap between the capacity that's available in the transportation infrastructure globally against the actual demand and the requirements to move cargo from point A to point B. Probably the third or fourth biggest impact to companies is the cost escalation that we've seen. If we looked at the year 2019 towards the end of the year, probably anybody could negotiate somewhere around $2,500 to $3,000 for a container coming out of the China, Asia area into the West Coast of the United States for $2,500 to $3,000. And as we saw in that prior slide, these prices are escalated. And now to get anything that's around $20,000 would be successful. And we're seeing numbers go up as much as high as that $32,000 number. And this has impacted the export market as well, on goods leaving both by air freight and by ocean freight. And for the cross-border traffic going up to Canada and Mexico and back and forth, as also the prices have escalated dramatically as well. All this issues has created a degree of uncertainty. And when we have a degree of uncertainty in the supply chain, it makes planning almost impossible and difficult. In our consulting practice, we have a lot of clients who approach us to try to give them an idea of how they should plan not only their demand planning process and their selling process around the world, but also in terms of a time frame that would work and at a cost would work. And we keep moving this time frame out, and we just keep increasing these costs because of the circumstances that we're going to talk about in this panel discussion. And I think one of the more important factors relative to this whole circumstance is that for most of us in supply chain, we started to see things get difficult in February, March of 2020. And while many of us thought that that problem would start to go away once we got into the fall and winter of 2020, in fact, it hadn't, and it escalated dramatically. Many of us hoped that after the Chinese New Year in 2021, that that problem would start to dissipate. And in fact, it's gotten a lot worse. And here we are in the middle of August in 2021, and the problem continues to escalate throughout the period of time. And now the big question is how long will it continue to escalate? And at what point in time will we think that it will stabilize? So a lot of these issues that I'm framing here are the ones that we're going to talk about today. And as Tom mentioned, we'll open questions at the end for our audience so that you can ask away anything that might be very important to you or ask for something to be re-explained or embellished. And you're also welcome to comment on anything that we talk about today. So we plan on dissecting all these issues, frame the consequences of what's going on, and offer solutions and mitigating strategies. What we did was we assembled a group of industry experts. We have 7 seasoned people on this panel, and then ask and debate some tough questions. I prepared a bunch of questions that I shared with the panel and allow the questions, comments, and thoughts from all the panelists and the audience towards the end. So this is kind of the format that we're going to follow. And last point that I want to frame out here is that this freight disruption issue has impacted the entire globe. There isn't a country around the world that isn't impacted by this problem. And every mode involved in transportation, being by truck or by ocean or by air, also rail, which I don't have a picture of, but would also be included in here. And also warehousing and 3PL is also impacted by this disruption. So our panel, we have Mike and Jason and Joe, Luz, Matt, James, and Sean, and here are their email addresses. So any of you can contact the registration process, and you're welcome to get the slide deck or just the slide from us. So with this, I've asked the panel to introduce themselves in a very quick way of just saying who they are, who they represent, their basic experience level, and if they wanted to make an opening comment regarding this issue. So we're going to start off with, in this order, Mike, if you can introduce yourself, and that's followed by Luz, then Joe, Matt, James, Sean, and Jason. So Mike Pisa, you're up.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. And Tom, I appreciate all the, appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone today. My name is Mike Pisa. I'm Vice President of Corporate Business Development at Apex Logistics. I've been here just about 11 years now. Apex we're a very strong international logistics freight forwarding organization. The backbone to the company has always been international air cargo. We're one of the leaders when it comes to international air cargo in the marketplace. Today we're about a $2 billion company, so we're uniquely positioned kind of in the mid-market, in terms of freight forwarding size, and it gives us some unique opportunities to be flexible, unique IT solution. And really what the big difference with Apex is that we're a large air cargo charter operator. So we've been doing the air cargo charters for 5 years or so, very heavily and very aggressively. And during the pandemic, which I'm sure we're going to dive into a little bit later, it kind of put us in a unique position because we had a tremendous, we had already planned prior to the pandemic to move about 1,200 air cargo charters in 2019. And with a lot of the capacity constraints that the market faced as a result of COVID, it left us in a very unique position. Apex was recently acquired by Kuehne+Nagel, which we're very excited about our new partnership with Kuehne+Nagel. And the main commodities that we usually, kind of the backbone to the company is really, the high-tech sector, perishable cargo, fashion, retail, and automotive, because those are very conducive to international air cargo environments. Obviously, we dive into other sectors, but those have always been the core. Through some strategic acquisitions in recent years, we're relatively significant size-wise on the ocean side as well, moving just about 100,000 FEUs per year, full container loads per year. And we'll kind of dive into that later, but it's definitely been a challenge. That the pandemic has kind of, with increased volume and limited capacity, we've been fighting through that like everyone else. But thanks a lot for having me. I'm looking forward to continuing the panel here.
Great. And Luz.
Hi, I'm Louise Cosner. I am from Dastic International. I've been in this business, in the chemical industry business for about 24 years now. I'm the Director of Operations for Dastic.
Okay. Thank you, Luz. And Joe?
All right, so now we turn the mute button off. Thanks, Tom. It's a real privilege to be here. Thanks for the invite, and my compliments speak to you for putting together such a pretty well-rounded group of people here, representing a lot of different walks of the logistics and compliance world. 27 years in the freight industry, 25 of which as a licensed customs broker. I'm currently with Cosina International. We're a worldwide distributor of medical and cosmetic packaging components, importer and exporter of which, and look forward to chatting and answering some good questions.
Great, thank you, Joe. And Matthew?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be a part of this panel. My name's Matt Sarfati. I'll just point out real quick, there is a typo in the email address. I'm staring at it on the screen. It's Rolling, not rolling. So maybe we can get you, Tom, to correct that before people see it. But not that, of course, I can add it to the 1,000 emails a day I'm getting, all related to supply chain disruption. Thanks, appreciate that. So I'm responsible for Rolling Logistics ocean product or sea freight product globally, based in Chicago. And I've got a little over 30 years of industry experience, having worked for steamship lines, worked for a large Midwest cargo owner or BCO, and then I guess the last 10, 12 years on the freight forwarding side, which is where I am right now. So thanks again.
Thank you, Matt. And James?
Yes, thanks. So I go by Jim, that's okay? So
Sure.
Jim Setsky, I'm the Hapag-Lloyd Chicago. I'm the Director of Sales. I currently am responsible for a 12-state area, so it's mainly the Midwest. I have 32 years experience in the business. 31 of them is with Hapag-Lloyd. I've done customer service, operations, and then mainly sales. I'm hopeful that I can give some insight on some of the topics at hand today regarding space, regarding contracting, some of the questions that Tom posed. Again, thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Right. Thank you, Jim. And Sean?
Hi, my name is Sean Lebson. I am the chair of the National Association of District Export Councils, the logo that's in the upper right of your screen right now. In addition to that, I also am involved in international sales for a small company that I'm sure you've heard of, UPS. When I go to parties, when we used to go to parties, you'd say where I work and everybody's got an opinion. Everybody knows UPS. But we've spent the better part of the last year and a half trying to manage some of those capacity issues and customer constraints and shutdowns and restrictions that we've all encountered over the last year. I'm in direct sales, work with customers and encounter it on a daily basis, and still come across people every day that are surprised that the world has changed when it comes to logistics. Try to explain that and manage it for them. Thank you.
So Sean, you had a full head of hair in February of 2020, and this is the result of the pandemic and trying to move freight at this particular point in time. Is that what you're telling us?
I lost that long ago, but yeah, it hasn't helped any.
Understood. And we have Jason.
Great, thanks, Tom. I'm Jason Manganaro. I'm the Vice President Commercial Technology for the Americas for Sparks Logistics. Sparks is a global freight forwarder based in Hong Kong. We specialize in customized supply chain solutions, and we're heavy in logistics and compliance technology. I've been in the industry for about 21 years.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for the panel. So to the audience, we're going to start with some questions that hopefully will respond to all the things that I kind of outlined on the prior slides. So Joe Mantello, our supply chain executive from Cosina Corporation, can you tell us what kind of impact have you seen on your company regarding international freight concerns since the pandemic started?
Sure. Let's see, where do you even begin? I think we can all agree that the impact on the international supply chain has been multifaceted over the last few years, but even more so now, affecting not only a reliable supply chain of goods coming in, but the spiraling costs as well. So what do you do? How do you look at that? I mean, how do you reevaluate the different areas? Well, you break them up in two, at least we did, as the supply chain itself, the flow of the goods, and the costs. The flow of the goods. We reevaluated the overall lead times. That was the first thing. When we saw this coming months ago, and along with the escalating costs, but we also saw the delays as well. We reevaluated our lead times and worked with our suppliers to perhaps move up the lead times on any of the orders that were in the mill already, and we addressed that. Purpose of that was obviously not to go out of stock, but it was also to lessen the cost of flipping ocean freight to air freight as well. What else did we do? And for the most part, that's how we targeted the reliability of the supply chain, is to working with the suppliers. Second, obviously, was the costs. How do you get a control of the cost? Well, we reevaluated a couple of things. I myself, the company is primarily an LCL and parcel importer. In other words, we really don't do much full container loads. Our orders are mostly small and medium size. I think as every LCL/carton importer has, we have a crossover from where it's more economical to either book as an LCL and book as a parcel shipment. Well, that whole crossover had to be reevaluated with the costs. UPS happily has been more or less steady with their rates. Thank you, Sean. Has been more or less steady with the parcel rates. So a whole reevaluation needed to be done. We went from having a crossover point of 100 pounds and 5 to 10 cartons, up to now 200 pounds, some places 20, even 30 cartons, where it's now more. We're still paying more than we used to, obviously, but now it's more economical to bring in via parcel service rather than LCL. So that was probably made the biggest impact, the reevaluation of the crossover between parcel service and LCL service. And third but not least, we looked at the Incoterms. We did have some suppliers that we were still on a DAP Incoterm. In other words, that they would control the cost of the freight to the New York port in my area. and they were also increasing their costs. Well, then now that only meant that they were absorbing the increases in freight. Well, maybe their increases were more severe than ours, based again on our UPS contract, on our LCL contract. So we reevaluated several DAP suppliers and did make the flip over to FOB terms with them, whereas going to lower our landed costs now because we're using our own terms. How it also affected is what we do, again, because we're an LCL importer, is that we used a PO management system to look at all the different shipments we had coming in from different areas. And we would do consolidations, obviously, at all the different common ports for all of the different suppliers that we had. And we actually finished last year, we finished close to an $80,000 savings in what it would have cost to move each and every shipment LCL, as opposed to building 20-foot containers, sometimes even 40-foot containers. It was an $80,000 savings. Well, with the increase in full container load costs, as you were just showing before, I mean, we have forwarders now bragging that they can get you a container for $17,000. I'm actually seeing these general solicitation emails from forwarders around the world, you know, promise me $17,000. Well, with the increase in that full container now it's made us have to reevaluate that consolidation program, because if you're not cubing out those 20-foot or 40-foot containers, then you're losing money. And we had to continue more. We had to divert more of that consolidation business, separate LCL, moving it with consolidators who are cubing out those containers, driving down those per cubic meter costs. So there was a little bit of a setback there as well.
Great. So, Joe, thank you for that opening review. That was really, really good. I do want to just mention one thing, is because you use the term PO management system, and so that everybody knows what we're referring to, is that it's a technology that importers and exporters use. And I think in Joe's case, it's really on the import side that he's using it, is where he sends through his forwarder to his supplier where the purchase order comes through. But that technology is now used to come around for the ISF filing, for creation of the bills of lading, and then goes actually into the brokerage function for customs clearance. And it creates a technology that really encompasses all aspects of the supply chain. And obviously it moves things electronically, so there's efficiency established, but it also at the same time allows a tremendous amount of information to be captured. And that's what I think Joe was referring to, is using the information coming from that PO system to really make better, more informed decisions. So thank you for that, Joe. So the second question is for you, Luz. Can you tell us what the greatest challenge regarding ocean freight has been for you?
Yes, the greatest. We are an importer of full container loads. 99% of our cargo comes in with 20-foot containers. So there is a challenge right there with getting equipment. But the biggest impact that the challenges that are happening right now are on the IPI cargo. Moving, the steamship lines, the carrier, most of the carrier has suspended API services. They only want to go to coastal ports. So we're struggling with that right now. This made us rethink how to move the freight, and we are coming into different ports depending on the location of the ultimate customer, and transloading, which brings into another piece of the puzzle with distribution centers that can do transloading for the cargo. The other challenge that we have is because our cargo is, some of it is hazardous. So there's another step that we have to monitor closely on how we move the cargo to which ports, the availability of those companies that will be able to transload hazardous cargoes and move it. That is the biggest problem that we have right now.
Understood. Okay. Thank you, Luz. So I just want to frame one part of what Luz mentioned, which is that a lot of the steamship lines, the ocean freight carriers, are ending their ability to move the freight at the inbound gateway, and they're not moving it to the inland point where they used to give you a door-to-door price and a door-to-door service. They're now limiting that service door to port, and a lot more companies are seeing that. And the same thing on the export side is they'll take it from the port area and not necessarily from the origin point. So
right. I'm sorry. What they used to do is they used to quote you the price to a rail yard, let's say Chicago, Kansas City, Memphis, and right now they're just walking away from that. I had contracts signed with my IPI points, and they took those port pairs away. They said, we can't do it. We have to remove them from the contract.
Understood. Okay, so just changing to the subject matter related to air freight. This question is for Sean. You can go first, and then Mike Pisa. But what has been the greatest challenge regarding air freight, and what steps have you taken to meet some of these challenges? So Sean, we'll start with you and then move to Michael.
Just like a lot of other areas, capacity is the biggest problem. And I suppose the way to start that off is really to address the ocean freight capacity problem. If you're an importer and you have to wait, where I am in the middle of the country was a 5-week time in transit from, let's say the coast of China to here in Texas. Now, well, you have to wait for that pickup, and then you have delays. So now I've got customers that are looking 2-3 months plus to get that. A lot of companies just don't have the opportunity to wait that long for freight. So the next thing they're going to do is say, I need to speed this along. I'm going to put it in the air freight network. So now capacity in the air freight network is constrained because there's a lot more volume. And what would normally be available to air freight carriers, the lower deck of a commercial passenger aircraft, is gone because nobody's flying internationally. So 40% of the capacity for air freight now has disappeared, and we've got more traffic that's coming that way. And if you're an integrated carrier, let's say a FedEx, UPS, DHL, now a lot of people can't get air freight, so they want to bump it up to courier services or small package services. So there's a cascade upward of pressure when it comes to capacity. So if you're a customer, what do? The first thing is you have to understand that if you've got time limits, that's not necessarily what you're going to get out of a carrier. Not only are there capacity problems, but there are regional shutdowns. Southern China had a shutdown like a month ago, didn't really make the news that much. India shuts down, that's something that has been in the news. Shanghai has had issues occasionally. Europe's been off and on. So in addition to those capacity constraints, you've got work slowdowns or stoppages. And I have customers that call me every day and wonder why I can't get something to one of their customers in India because nobody's moving. Or it happened in Ho Chi Minh City last week. I need to move something. Nobody's moving in Ho Chi Minh City. There are like 3 postal codes that are being worked. So there are a lot of capacity constraints that way. So one is to make sure that you plan accordingly, because what you might think is going to be a 3-day transit time because you're using an express freight move, it's not going to be 3 days. And as much as you push your carrier, in a lot of cases, it's just not going to happen. Next thing I would say is form a relationship with a carrier or set up recurring shipments with that carrier. I get calls every day from somebody that can't get shipments out with their current carrier, and they're going to go, hey, can you get this moving? We're trying to, in a lot of cases, UPS has its own planes, but after that, our capacity goes on commercial aircraft. Everybody's got that bottleneck right now. So hopping around isn't necessarily going to serve your interests, but if you have a regular recurring pickup, it's going to help you when in origin or wherever you are, because they're going to know that they've got that capacity coming every day. If you were to come to me and say, I've got 5,000 kilos, I want to move it tomorrow. No, I'm not moving it tomorrow. And I don't think you're going to find anybody else that's got that readily available amount of capacity either.
Right.
Next thing, if you've got a large shipment that's coming in and you can't get it moving, break it up, bring in what you need via an express shipment or air freight, let the rest follow along in ocean. don't think that it's all got to come at once. Just bring in what you need. And because what you're bringing in via an express move, you're going to be paying a lot more. We've heard some of these ocean freight rates. I would say coming out of China, as an example, in 2019, we were paying, a lot of customers that we have were paying maybe $5 a kilo. Last year, I had people that were begging to pay $40 a kilo and I couldn't give them any space. Now that's gone down now. And if you were to look at it on a calendar basis, I think we're in the lull right now. Come peak season, late September, I think we're going to pick up as far as some of those capacity constraints, and coming out of Asia, we're going to have them until at least spring of next year. Other thing, not necessarily pandemic related, but we still have a lot of customers that ship internationally a lot of air. If you have shipments that are coming in retail packaging and you need to get them in, condense them down, really build that density of your shipments so that you can get a lot more in. I had a guy that I was working with the other day that wanted to bring in footwear, and he had calculated out he wanted to pay $250 a pair because that's what it was going to cost him in his LCL move when he started planning this whole thing a year ago. Told him I could bring in each pair for $9.20. And he's going, and he's probably going to have to do it. And it's not like I'm trying to gouge him. I can't get capacity for less than that for this guy. And I suppose that in a long-term sense, the best thing you can do, which really doesn't help anybody at this point, but really reassess your supply chain. And, you know, I teach on a regular basis supply chain management, and we talk about vulnerability in the supply chain and supply chain risk. And I'm located in Texas, and I'm a strong proponent. If you're looking for low-cost labor, look to Mexico. I can be in Mexico by dinner time. If I have a truckload of product in Mexico, I can have it pretty much anywhere in the United States in a couple days. And short of a border closing, I can get it. Where if you're looking at congested places, for example, coming out of Asia right now, you simply can't.
Understood.
So that's my long-winded way of saying capacity is the big problem.
Thank you, Sean. So Michael, you want to add to that?
Sure. You know, I agree with everything Sean mentioned. I'm just going to try and add some complimentary comments here. You know, the capacity is definitely the big challenge. I think prior to COVID, I don't think people realize that 40% of all air cargo coming out of Asia actually travels on a passenger aircraft. And having all that passenger aircraft sidelined because there wasn't any international travel going on, you're basically taking out 40% of the total air market. And, you know, that just creates a demand capacity imbalance on a very large scale. And, you know, there has been a couple of things that have happened over COVID. There's been some very big peaks. So with this reduced capacity, you know, there was obviously a very high peak when everyone started shipping the PPE products where rates were up in the $15, $20 range. And I think, you know, Sean's comment that he was just mentioning, I think I agree with wholeheartedly. We're about to see another very large peak. And I saw a comment up here on the Q&A. You know, China is experiencing an incredibly difficult COVID situation today. You know, we got some emergency phone calls over the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, that basically certain airports have shut down. You know, that includes some of the major cargo airports in China. You know, Ningbo, you know, and a few other. You know, there was about 6 when they cut. You know, some of them stopped completely, and some of them cut down to half cargo operations. So, you know, currently there's a massive COVID issue going on in China that they're trying to address that's drastically impacting air cargo operations. The other thing I'll comment on is I know that a lot of people, you know, realize that there was a lot of passenger conversion flights. And what I mean by that was, like, for example, United jumped into the cargo game with their passenger aircrafts. When we saw this shortfall in capacity from Asia to North America, and then there was all these passenger aircraft sidelined, I think some of the airlines said, okay, we'll convert these into, you know, cargo carrying aircrafts. But you got to remember the payload is very small, you know, basically 1/5 of what a cargo freighter can hold. But, you know, that capacity has now come back, you know, and has stopped flying international cargo. And, you know, so because the main reason for that is, you know, you're starting to see a lot of domestic U.S. travel now. So you had airlines like Delta, United, British that had jumped in and started, you know, converting their passenger aircrafts to cargo aircrafts, but now that domestic travel has picked up again, those aircrafts are returning to service the domestic travel industry, which is a more profitable business for those carriers. There's been challenges with crew. You know, we're big, like I mentioned in the first comment, we're big in the cargo charter market. You know, the crews, now most cargo flights are traveling with 2 crews because they can't lay over in certain countries. And I know it's a, you know, it seems like a minor thing, but it's quite a large deal. Instead of being able to sleep and rest in a given country, that plane has to land, and for quarantine reasons, the crew cannot exit the aircraft, and then they have to, you know, fly immediately back out, which creates a challenge that we had not seen before in the past. So, and you know, there's, you know, to a certain extent, there's a crew pilot shortage on the international cargo flights, and it's mainly because, you know, a lot of flights are traveling with two crews on them. And then the other thing is that, you know, there's been prioritized cargo, and you know, it's, you know, especially with PPE and COVID vaccine relief, and you know, anything from syringes to hospital gowns, and you know, each country goes through different phases, but that cargo typically gets prioritized by the given airlines because it's pandemic relief type cargo. So you know, you have to deal with that as it ebbs and flows with different countries as well. And then the last comment, I'll make 2 last comments. You know, we would love to purchase more charters. You know, this year we purchased 1,500 charters. There is no more aircrafts available in the entire market. Okay, I would probably love to go out and get another 500 if I could, but we cannot, and just because they're simply not available currently. And the last part is the network here in like North America. You know, everyone's talking about the ports and them being overwhelmed, but you know, the destination airports here in the U.S., particularly Chicago and Los Angeles, have been overwhelmed. I mean, you know, the ground handling agents that service a lot of the what I'll call general cargo carriers, you know, they're just overworked. I mean, you're dealing, you know, they were never strong. They were having trouble dealing with the demand prior to the pandemic, and then you put a 30% increase on that, and they just can't handle it. I mean, it could take you 8, 10, 12 days to pick up cargo in Chicago, depending on what ground handle you're at. So, you know, all these things just make things challenging. I mean, and, you know, but, you know, I think, you know, we find ways to, you know, get through that, and there's different ways to do that we can talk about as well.
Right. Thank you, Mike. So I want to switch over, and Matt, I'll ask you the question: is are you observing the carriers, and probably referring mostly to some ocean freight carriers and additionally some air carriers that are not honoring their contracts on price and their service parameters?
I mean, absorbing in terms of the cost difference, the answer to that is no. I mean, we, you know, historically in the past, as an ocean intermediary, you know, you can make some commercial consideration if, you know, if the carrier makes a mistake or we make a mistake and you're covering maybe a few $100s, it's not such a big deal. But you know, the gap between the contractual pricing that was negotiated, again, speaking primarily of the eastbound, you know, Asia into the U.S. market, the difference between the long-term contractual rates negotiated in, you know, in April for a May 1st start date, and where the current spot markets are is significant, right? And I don't think it's just rolling. I don't think you see any, you don't see carriers or any intermediaries at this point absorbing the cost difference. What I see for the most part is, I think most of our customers are, you know, they're not working exclusively with Rolex, so they're getting additional data points, right, and sources of information. And I think there's at this point a general understanding that this is where the market is, right? And I mean, a lot of this also, I would just point out, and not that Jim needs me to defend Hapag and the ocean carriers, but you know, a lot of this also, these are just, you know, pandemic related operational constraints that just don't allow them to actually have a voyage, right? And when there's no voyage, there's no capacity, right? And then freight just bottlenecks in Asia for weeks and weeks. And of course, the market now creates that leverage for spot rates and premium rates to increase it. You know, historically high freight levels. I forget who was it, somebody had mentioned they were happy with 17,000. I would kill for a $17,000 rate right now. So anywhere, just not there.
Understood. So, Matt, you mentioned premium freight pricing, and it was a question I was going to ask later, but we can introduce it now. Can you explain to everybody what's premium freight pricing?
Yeah, I would say it's limited to several carriers that are have maybe blocked out a percentage of their available capacity to sell in the market at the highest possible freight rates, and they market it as premium, right? They have different names: C Priority, Diamond Tier Plus. There's a lot of different names for it, but I would say it's essentially an opportunistic point of view from the carriers to make as much money as they can for as long as the market will allow them. Right? I mean, customers are paying for it, so there's still clearly a market for these types of premium services. I would point out as well that just because you pay a premium price doesn't mean you're going to get a premium service. It's still not a guarantee of equipment. It's not a guarantee that the freight's going to load on the vessel, and it's not a guarantee that the freight won't get bottlenecked in one of the ports of entry for anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks. It's just it places you at a higher priority over somebody who won't pay the price.
Understood. So we have on the panel Jim Setsky, who introduced himself as an executive with Hapag-Lloyd. So I'll put that question to you as well, Jim, about the premium pricing. Can you comment on that?
Sure, Tom. So the premium pricing, we don't have like a separate program that like an MSC or Maersk has, but where we have a premium, we do dedicate a certain portion of the vessel for like FAK, freight all kinds, or at the spot market rate. So even within our quick quote, you can actually see how we quote just the regular FAK, and then there's a shipping guarantee where we actually put a guarantee on it, and then there's a sizable premium that they put on the actual quotation, subject to space availability, equipment availability, and things like that Matt kind of described. So that's the way Hapag does it. But I have to point out, Tom, on one perspective, Hapag-Lloyd is really only 4.5% of the Asia to U.S. market, maybe due to just some scope, right? So today, Hapag-Lloyd has about 18,000 TEUs a week on our 16 services. Someone like Costco has like 98,000, just to kind of give you some scope. So 98,000 versus our 18,000.
Understood.
So this is why the carriers have different strategies. Costco, American, ONE, or whoever that has more capacity, they might have a different strategy when it comes to premium.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So one of the things that supply chain executives have to consider in how they manage their supply chain responsibilities is, should they be negotiating directly with a carrier or go through a freight forwarder, custom house broker, or on the ocean freight side, an NVOCC, a non-vessel operating common carrier? So I'll throw that question to you, Jason. Do you have an opinion on that?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I would say, historically, that's really been driven by the amount of volume that you're moving on certain lanes. It's always more advantageous, I would say, as a rule of thumb, if you have a sizable amount of volume to deal directly with a carrier. You sometimes get some advantages in terms of space allocation and in terms of pricing. But in the current market, it seems like flexibility is really the key factor. And for that, you always, I feel like, are in a better position to mix in freight forwarders and VOCCs as kind of more flexible options within your supply chain mix. I will say that, a lot of what we're seeing, there's kind of a need for creativity, I would say. The traditional ways of moving freight aren't working. The traditional lanes aren't necessarily as open as they normally would be. And in this case, I think, forwarders in general bring technology. They bring some creativity. They bring some, I guess, kind of outside of the box view of how to move things around. And I think that's an advantage today that maybe under normal circumstances doesn't stand out as much. And we are being approached actually by a lot. I'm sure the other forwarders in the panel are experiencing the same thing, that a lot of traditional BCOs are coming and asking for help and asking for options that they can't find among their normal mix of carriers these days. So that's what I would say in the current market. I think that flexibility is key, Tom.
Sure. So I'll open up just to the panel if anybody wants to jump in on that question. And the question really is, a supply chain executive has to go about making a decision on how they're going to approach the purchasing of freight. And they can obviously go directly to a carrier. They can work with a forwarder, broker, an NVOCC, or an air freight consolidator. Does anybody else on the panel other than Jason have an opinion that they may want to share with the audience?
Okay, go ahead, Matt.
I'll wait for you guys.
So I would just add a comment that we saw a trend that start about 2 or 3 years ago, where some of the large BCOs would add a small or allocate a small percentage of their volume to freight forwarders, and or NVOCCs. Historically, if you were a BCO, you wanted to realize that cost savings benefit. So you would try and sign directly with the carriers as much as you could, because you could achieve some cost savings that way. But I think companies started to realize 2 or 3 years ago that NVOs have some benefits. If you go over your allocation on a given week or a given month, the NVO can easily pick up that cargo and move it. Where the carriers will, sometimes, I don't want to speak too much for the ocean carriers, but they'll sometimes say, listen, you've already moved your 20 containers allocation this week. We don't have any more allocation for you, but the NVO has flexibility, right? We can go to multiple different carriers, any carrier that might have additional space, and move that cargo. And I think what we saw 2 or 3 years ago, where the large BCOs were allocating 10, 15% of their volume to the NVO community. But now that number, coming into this contract season and the year prior in 2019, we're seeing much larger numbers, maybe 20, 30% of some of the large BCO volume going to NVO. So I think it's a trend that started a couple of years ago, but it's really been accelerated due to these market conditions that Jason was referring to. There's flexible solutions to be had. And the last comment I'll make is, we get comments now like, we'll take a booking, anywhere, take the booking from China and just land it anywhere in the US. We don't care where it is, and if you're under contractual terms with somebody, it's hard to do that, right? Where NVOs can get a little bit more flexible and creative. So.
Understood. Okay. Anybody else on the panel want to jump in on that?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, Luz, go ahead.
Go ahead, Luz.
Okay. As an importer, I agree that right now the market conditions are, you need to have different venues to get your cargo, and working with the MVOs, freight forwarders is a plus. And like he mentioned, once your allocation is, you have your 2, 3, 4, 5 containers per week. Once that is done, you need to, find ways of shipping your cargo, and the flexibility offered by the other MVOs and freight forwarders is a plus.
Understood. Okay. And did somebody else, I think I heard somebody else wanting to.
Yeah, Tom, I just wanted to, maybe the one other comment I'd add is, it doesn't have to be either or, right? I think there's ways to work with carriers and forwarders or NVOCCs, to get the right solution that you need. So I agree with the other panelists. I mean, I'm biased. I work for a freight forwarder, for an intermediary, and I know the flexibility and the agility that we bring to our customers. But clearly, there's benefits working directly with ocean carriers as well. So again, I think it really depends on your supply chain, the size of your team, what your objectives are, right, and then find the right solution that could and very often does include both direct carrier contracts and leveraging the speed and agility of a forwarder.
Good. Okay. So I heard in the comments this thing about freight allocation. Two of you mentioned it. And Jim, if I could ask you to kind of explain to us what freight allocation is and and how it would work with inside an ocean freight carrier?
Sure. So the allocation, if we look at Asia to US, the time today, a carrier will have, let's say, 15 or 16 services. They're sharing the services with other carriers. So I'll simplify it, on a 10,000 TEU ship, Hapag-Lloyd might get 2,000 TEUs of that 10,000. That's what we're allocated. Within those 2,000, we then allocate it a service contract cargo first, then it's the spot market. We designate it per port rotation, right? So if the rotation is going China, then Hong Kong, and Southeast Asia, and then back, we divide it up per port location. So same 2,000 TEUs. The advantage of having ships in the network is kind of anecdotally to keep in mind that carrier, again, in a non-full market, we've been full now for probably 2 years, but in a non-full market, the same 2,000 TEUs, if I didn't use that 2,000 TEUs, and let's say ONE is the underlying carrier, he would actually be able to use those same extra volume. So that just kind of gives you some background. I'm certainly open for questions if they need more clarification.
Sure. And we'll hold those questions to the end. So just staying with you for a moment, Jim, is that one of the issues that we have heard come back from a lot of the carriers and the NVOCCs, the forwarders, is the issue that there just is a limited amount of container and chassis availability. Can you speak to that?
So the container availability at origin is where the real problem is right now for the astronomical freight rates, right, that are coming out of China. The reason why we're out of equipment is because some of these containers are being held up in pools, right? So an importer, major manufacturing, whether it be a car company, chemical company, they're importing it inland. So in Hapag-Lloyd world, we do a lot of inland still. So I think one of the panelists mentioned a lot of the carriers do import only. That is definitely true, but I'm going to speak for Hapag-Lloyd's perspective. We actually do have containers inland, but then the customer takes the container from the rail ramp and then they fold it up at their terminal, their warehouse. And that's where the chassis is getting stuck. And that's also where the container is not getting returned. How that has a cascade effect on exports is now the carriers are having to put more empties on the ship instead of loads because they want to get the container right back to the Shenzhen or to Shanghai to get it to be able to be used right away, because they don't want it to be held up on an export container that's now stuck with agri, let's say, in China or in Guangdong, waiting for it to get unloaded. So those are the two elements that are involved with equipment, I guess.
So Jim, from what I understand as well, is that that's one of the things stressing the export market for ocean freight, companies that utilize ocean freight, because the steamship lines want to turn around an empty container very quickly, and therefore a lot of exporters cannot get the space that they require or a container that they require because of that issue. Is that true?
That is correct.
Right. Okay. Got it. So Jason, I'll ask you the question relative to the fact that what a lot of shippers are doing are acquiring their own assets, meaning they're acquiring their own planes, they're acquiring their own ships, they're acquiring their own chassis, containers, and equipment and so forth like that. Can you speak to that phenomenon that we see a lot of people doing? And I'll reference it by saying that for those people that are following the news and international trade and transportation, is that Home Depot just recently chartered a vessel so that it could take at least 50% of the capacity of a 10,000 TEU container ship, so that they didn't have to, deal with some of the issues going on in the supply chain, as one of the largest, users of containers and ocean freight in the world.
Yeah. No, thank you, Tom. And absolutely, I think this is where we've all kind of touched on, I think, the flexibility and the creativity that's needed these days. So I know with Sparks, and I think it's a phenomenon that's happening with a lot of companies, we've been approached and we've also kind of worked with customers to see different options that they have in the market today, acquiring their own pool of chassis, acquiring their own ocean containers. And in some cases, acquiring empty containers and then facilitating the resale of those containers once they've been utilized and emptied, so that they don't need to have a long-term asset that they're investing in, but kind of a shorter-term option for getting equipment where they need it, and then, you know, kind of having the ability to get on vessels where space is available when maybe the holdup is getting empty equipment. I can also speak from our standpoint as a, you know, medium-sized freight forwarder. We've also done some, you know, asset investment ourselves in terms of, you know, we used to be purely kind of, I would say, asset light. We had our offices and our personnel, but not a lot of hard assets. And in the last year, we've opened more warehouses, including one in Miami that's specifically in support of the Latin American and Central American market. And then we just opened a drayage division, kind of in answer to a customer that was suffering from the lack of trucking capacity to move their freight from the Greer, South Carolina rail ramp to their facility. And we've opened a division kind of in support of that. And now we're seeing a huge demand for that kind of, you know, service as well. So I think it's happening on the shipper side, it's happening on the service provider side. And to me, it's kind of an extension of this need for, you know, kind of reliability of service and creating reliability where you can, and also just being creative and trying to find places where you can, you know, control the assets that you have and control the cost somewhat more than you can on the open market.
Understood. So, Mike Pisa, relative to this question about company acquiring their own assets, I mean, technically, you chartering the aircraft is controlling assets as compared to just buying space on various cargo aircraft carriers. So, can you speak to this from your perspective?
Well, you know, the air cargo charter is definitely a, you know, an asset that is under control for usually multiple years, and we've jumped into the ocean charter market to a certain degree. It's a multi, you know, customer charter where you get a certain allocation per vessel. But the ocean charter is very capital intensive. I mean, it's, you know, you're paying up front, you know, for a certain amount of capacity. As new carriers have come onto the market, there's kind of brokers that are, you know, operating these multi-tenant charter vessels, if you will. You know, we had a discussion this morning with a new carrier that is going to try it too. It's a, you know, it's a bulk vessel carrier that they think they could move 1,000 containers, and they think it's worth a shot under the current market condition and freight rates. So I think there's more carriers looking at this as opportunistic and trying to enter into the markets. You know, some of them being inter-Asia carriers, or possibly, you know, carriers that have just serviced the South and Central America markets. So it'll be interesting to see how the ocean, you know, if there's any more carriers that kind of step into the market, like what we've seen here in recent weeks or recent months. They're very small carriers, though, so, you know, keep that in mind. They're not large vessels, very limited in terms of capacity. But the specific question about a customer is kind of continuing that in the future, I just don't see that being a case, you know, because if you think, you know, Home Depot probably is one of like 2 or 3 that could possibly do that. But you have to have that much cargo ready from all of your factories at the exact sailing dates that are being offered by that particular vessel. And, you know, just speaking from our experience with air freight and different things, you know, being able to, you know, have your suppliers all lined up and ready to go is not an easy task, I think, as a long-term solution for that kind of volume. So I don't think it's a trend that's going to continue, but it's interesting that it's happening now.
So, Michael, let me just jump into that question a little bit further, because I know that you're involved as a service provider to Amazon and have been with them for a long time. I mean, there's an example of a company that is really making an effort to control the transportation infrastructure that it's using, all the way from origin overseas, all the way through to, you know, the last mile delivery. Can you speak to that?
You know, I think, you know, I can't speak to that specifically, but I think that, you know, again, the large shippers that have volume have the opportunity to do unique things like this. You know, so, you know, that is interesting. You know, there's a lot of things going on like that.
Right. Okay. So when we talk about, you mentioned the break bulk vessel, I'm going to switch over to Louise, because Louise made me aware several weeks ago that you know, she's been moving containers for over 25 years now. And just recently, because of the problem associated with trying to get containers without the delay and without the price increase, that you went ahead and chartered a vessel that handled your cargo break bulk. Can you speak to that?
Yes, we have unique situations, and this was in relationship with what I mentioned before in reference to IPI shipments. We needed to move about 300 containers into Kansas City, and there was no way that we're going to be able to get space. So our product is dry bulk. It comes loaded into 20-foot containers in super bags. So we decided to go into bulk. So we are bringing in about 5,000 metric tons into the port of Houston from China. And we did an estimated costing of from China, from the warehouse to the end customer, and the price is it comes out similar if we were being paid between $17,000 and $18,000 per container. So for us, this gave us the flexibility to be able to bring in the quantity that the customer needed in a short period of time. And if this model works, we might keep this as ongoing.
Understood. Okay.
There is a lot of little details in shipping bulk, but I think right now, based on the cost of the ocean freights being offered, it's a really good option, especially if you have a lot of cargo to ship at once.
Understood. Okay. So a creative solution that has worked. And I also understand you had exports to Latin America that you use the same methodology as well. Is that correct?
Exactly. Right now we're going to be loading the next vessel with about 3,000 metric tons going to Argentina in bulk.
Understood. Okay. Just switching the gears here and so forth, and I'm being sensitive to the time because I want to make sure that we have time for the questions. And I'm seeing that there's a lot of questions and also line up for chat as well lined up. So I want to make sure that the audience has plenty of time to talk to us. So Sean, I know that you're on both sides of the equation, import and export. So how have you viewed exports been impacted in the supply chain since COVID has fallen into place?
On the ocean side, we've already heard from a few people on how it's difficult to get containers for exports. I have a number of customers that are waiting weeks for containers so that they can go ahead and export, so it's hurting them. Right. On the air side, it's not so bad, although there have been some other congestion points created worldwide because so many people are moving their assets to Asia so that they can move them to North America. So you might encounter some difficulties in Europe because now they're flying with smaller aircraft that have been repositioned to Asia to take advantage of the need there, as well as the higher shipping costs. I think how this whole situation has hurt exporters, though, in a lot of cases, is that they simply can't get materials so that they can export their parts. I wish I could bring up a picture. I was at a company I was working with last week, and you go out in their warehouse and they have hundreds of boxes lined up, ready to go with open tops. They're waiting on one part to come in. When one part comes in, they can go ahead and export those several hundred packages. Another customer that was having difficulties, this is interesting. They do high quality ski boats with steering wheels that come from Italy. They had 20 ski boats sitting in their warehouse waiting for steering wheels. Those steering wheels came in, they were ready to go ahead and move that product.
Right.
Now, we're talking about a lot of COVID related issues, but there are a lot of other changes in the world, regulatory changes that are changing the scene for exporters. Of course, we had Brexit, which caused an absolute mess in the UK, which also caused problems in Europe because they couldn't move product to the UK. And then we had VAT changes in the collection of VAT in Europe as of July 1st, which still there are a lot of repercussions for retail shippers going to Europe because now collection of VAT, the process has changed. CARM is coming up in Canada, which is going to change the way duty and taxes are collected in Canada. So all of these things are going on as well that are changing. And then even before we had COVID, we had a lot of import duties through 301 and 232 in the United States, which were already creating problems with imports coming in from the rest of the world as of 2018-19. So there have been a lot of regulatory changes that have been creating problems for exporters as well.
Understood. Okay. So again, I want to be sensitive to the time here because I see queued up a lot of questions. So I'd like to offer a question, and I'm going to start out with the answer on it. And the question is when do we foresee, as industry professionals, when there may be some normalization of the supply chain, and we start to see this reduction in delays, a more balancing of capacity and demand, and also stabilization of the pricing. So in our practice, we're engaged with a lot of companies who rely on our information about this. So when the COVID first started in 2020 in February, March, we told companies to prepare that the delays and the cost escalation would probably be seen through the balance of the year, all the way through to 2021, the Chinese New Year, and then we probably see a stabilization after that point. As we got into the fall of 2020, into October, and then into November, we kind of changed that position because we saw this thing extending probably into the late summer where we are now in 2021. Once we got through the Chinese New Year and got into February, March of this year, we extended that advice that we saw the disruption extending through at least the Chinese New Year of 2022. And here now we are in August, and we're now looking at probably from our position that this is probably going to extend all the way through the summer of 2022 and into the fall, that we're going to see continuation of this price escalation and these capacity problems still exist. This is based on a lot of criteria that we follow in terms of manufacturing, demand planning, capacity issues that we actually track and trace through a number of organizations. So one of the things that we also have a sensibility about is that when this normalization eventually takes hold, we don't think that the ocean freight prices of $3,000 for a container is ever going to be reached again, and that it's more likely to be in the $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 range. And air freight that you could possibly negotiate at $1.50 or $2 a kilo may end up staying at that $4 to $5 range as well, meaning that the carriers have learned what numbers they need to really turn around the profit, both on the ocean and the air freight side. So that's kind of what we think it is. So I'm going to open this up to the panel to offer how they feel about this as well, because I'm sure that everybody listening in, this is a critical issue for your own planning purposes of what you're telling your management of how long this circumstance is going to exist. So I'll open it to the panel.
I'll go, Tom. So I think my first comment is I agree with just about everything you say, and I just want to, at some point this pandemic will end, hopefully, and that there right now, disposable income, if you look at it, people aren't going out to eat, people really aren't traveling often, and fortunately, there's been opportunity to kind of continue to, a lot of people continue to be employed and have this disposable income along with some relief packages that the government has offered. So there's disposable income that will dry up at some points, and it will hopefully normalize. But I think your points about I think what everyone's realized now is there is a value to that space. I think for a while, logistics, both air and ocean, was commoditized. Oh, I just got this, space on this ship and it's only $1,500. But I think everyone realized that they're, under these times, carriers and shippers alike, that there's a real value to that space that'll, settle somewhere. I think the numbers you said are a good guess, and we'll see what that happens. But I think that people will look at the whole situation a little bit different, rather than just being like a commoditized product, that, oh, it's just space on a vessel. Not really. You're controlling someone's supply chain, and supply chain for usually some very important stuff, whether it's medical, whatever commodity you deal in, right? It's important to you, and there's a value to it.
Sure, and I think tied into that conversation is, I think that senior management and organizations all around the world are realizing now the importance of supply chain management and also supply chain risk management. And, it raises the bar, I think, of the importance of the supply chain executive and their expertise and their contribution to the company's business model. And I think that's going to be a residual favorable impact in the long term that I see. But I'm curious to know, because we have two carriers represented here. We have UPS and we have Hapag-Lloyd. I'm curious from your perspective how you feel about this question about normalization when it may occur.
On the ocean carrier side, this is again my opinion, I don't see it slowing down at least for another year and a half or so. One comment is there's really not any new tonnage coming to the trade, right? Globally speaking, there's not any new ships coming. In 2024, you will start seeing some of these big ships that you're seeing being the carriers announcing that they're building. Those will start hitting the market in 2024. And of course, there's a cascade effect, right? So if these 23,000 TEU ships come, those existing services that they might be in, they end up in Asia to US market if the ports can take that size ship and so forth. So I don't see it slowing down, at least for 2022 for sure, and maybe even part of 2023.
Understood. And how about you, Sean? What is UPS putting out there?
Well, thankfully, I'm not burdened with making certain senior management decisions, but my best guess case would say sometime next spring we might see a little bit of a normalization. But public service announcement: put a mask on and get vaccinated, and it might be sooner.
Right. Good point. Good point. Anybody else want to chime in on that question?
I just wanted to say real quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe.
I'd actually like to pose a question to my colleagues here. I mean, I'm the one that has to. Some of the other ones, I'm the one that has to answer to ownership. Just why these drastic increases may continue until, God forbid, 2023. I think we all know the only real tangible solution is the creation of more capacity. I know ships are being built. I know containers are being built, maybe more for the ocean freight than the air freight. But if the production of equipment, at least, does increase the way we're hoping it will increase to lessen the demand, short of that, why do we see it increase? Maintaining these prices in 23.
Joe, maybe just on a simple basis, one of our services, we'll just say the PM2 that goes from China to Tacoma, there's supposed to be 52 sailings a week. We're only going to sail 44 because the ports are so congested. The ports can't even accommodate the volume that we already have. So our intention is to get 52 sailings, but we're not going to get 52 sailings because the network just physically can't absorb the volume that's coming through the ports. So that's why I'm saying I don't see the congestion is going to stay the same. The volume is still going to keep coming, and we're not going to see relief right away. That's my opinion as far as 2022 is concerned.
So I think the answer to the question, Joe, is that the demand that is in place and has been in place now since about April, May of 2020, that a lot of people don't see that demand changing significantly and possibly even increasing. And appreciate the fact that in the United States here, we just passed a transportation infrastructure bill that's going to bring over $1 trillion into the spend area. Think of all the materials and equipment and raw components and parts that are going to be brought in and manufactured here to support that, right? Along with everything else that's going on. And I think that that's why some people are pushing this out to say that, it takes, almost 2 years to build the vessel. It takes like 7-8 months to build an aircraft. And, there's no real big queued up of either of those things happening that's going to meet that capacity. So I think that's where that reference point is coming, so that the transportation infrastructure at all the gateways, the airports, Mike Pisa was talking about, there's just not enough manpower to unload the aircraft. That there's a sensibility that this is going to continue because that demand will be continuing through that period of time. And it's a theory. It's not something yet, that you could say is absolutely proven. There's not a lot of science behind that. There's a lot of qualitative assessment in there rather than just quantitative. But I think that's where that's coming from.
And Tom, I just want to add, and Joe, I'd like to add one comment. Like, I think our company, we look at it like right now, no one has the inventory levels that they want, right? Everyone's behind on inventory. U.S. inventory levels are at all-time lows, right? And right now, people are just trying to, get as much cargo in as they can, for the holiday season, let's call it. But next year what I'll call is the year of replenishment, right? That the demand is going to be so hard because inventory levels are so low that people are going to continue to have to bring this stuff in and get caught up and things of that nature. So, I just don't see it slowing down either at all.
There's also, there were a lot of points that were brought up when importers were left with a wealth of inventory during 2020 when the economy suffered, obviously because of the pandemic. A lot of people are evaluating how much inventory they actually, they may not be bringing in as much, which would have an adverse effect to that. I appreciate your point though, and it's a valid point, but hopefully it'll be countered by that.
But I think that one thing for sure in business models for the short term is that lean manufacturing and lean inventory management is over. I don't think anybody's going to tout either one of those things in their business model because of what's happened in the last year and a half. So I think that's going to have an impact. Tying into what Mike's saying is that people's inventory levels are generally lower than where they feel comfortable. So they're buying everything they possibly can right now.
Yeah, and Tom, I was going to add, you don't hear the term just in time anymore with inventory, right? It used to be the buzzword for decades. You don't hear that anymore. Everybody's reevaluating that. Okay.
So I want to switch over to the questions from the audience. So I think, Tom, you, I think, agreed that you're going to present those questions to us as a group.
Yeah, that's correct, Tom, and thank you. So right now we have about 15 questions. So I'll start off here and then Tom, you can direct the question.
Sure.
So the first question is, why hasn't transportation supply caught up with demand? What caused the transportation supply to be way lower than demand and not catch up? Were these actions taken to lower supply?
Does somebody want to try answering that question? I'll start off with the point is that when you try to look at this from an intellectual perspective, not just using quantitative, but using really qualitative analysis in this thing, is that when COVID first hit in February and March, you may remember that the whole world stopped. I'll never forget the day that Trump got on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock and said he's closing down the country, right? And appreciate that happened in other countries previous to that, and a lot of countries quickly followed as well. So, everything stopped. And so assets were moved to different places. Transportation infrastructure wasn't up and running successfully. And after the shock of those 2 or 3 months, February, March, April, May, the world started to, learn to deal and navigate some of the issues around COVID and started to open up. When it opened up, you had a problem now that there were a lot of inventory balances that were off kilter. You had transportation infrastructure that wasn't working because if you had longshoremen that were sick in Houston, they closed down the port of Houston. If you had longshoremen that were sick in the port of Long Beach, it closed down. And that happened in about 19 different ports in the United States, as well as around the world. You had the same thing happen in an airport. If a cargo handling facility, all of a sudden, somebody got COVID, they shut it down. There were knee-jerk reactions to what happened, and that continued to stress the transportation infrastructure. Mike and I think Sean made the point about how much freight moved in passenger aircraft, about 40%, I think was the number used. Appreciate the fact that international transportation stopped, and it continues at this point in time to be significantly reduced. There are still restrictions here in the United States for people coming in from various places and going to various places, as well as other places around the world. So you had a very stressed transportation infrastructure that the residual impact of that is hitting today. The demand now is really what the issue is that everybody is supplying their inventories to balances that they've never done before. Lean, that's why I made the point before, lean manufacturing and lean warehousing and inventory management is over. So that now is stressing this whole situation. So just from an intellectual perspective, that would be the answer that I would share to that person who asked the question. And if somebody wants to chime in from the panel, please.
Very good. We'll move on to the next question. This attendee said the biggest problem, the two vessel companies, Lloyd and Maersk, canceled my shipment 3 times from Chile to Oakland. Any advice?
Well, since I'm with Hapag-Lloyd, I presume that was us. So I would need to know more details in regards to what exactly shipment it was.
Yeah. So
I would have to get some of the details in regards to.
So Jim, would you be willing that this person could email you directly to ask you that question?
Yes.
That would be fine. So the person who asked that question, Jim from Hapag-Lloyd will try to help you specifically.
And the email address is listed there, James.
Right.
Setsky. Yeah.
Right. So, this to me, when I'm asked this type of question, which is very often now, I always ask the question, who's your freight forwarder and who's your broker? And I think that's where the reliance on a good forwarder and a good broker is a critical factor here, because if a particular carrier fails, they generally have other options, and that's where they become more creative. The word would be more resilient and agile in trying to move your freight from one carrier to another if you have in a particular problem. And I would always go down that path and ask it. And you're always welcome to contact me, and I'd be more than happy to point you in some directions of service providers that we know have the ability to do a really good job.
very good. We'll move to the next one. It says, I have read the U.S. is reliant on a few state-linked Chinese companies. Why isn't this being looked at as a national emergency and focused on by the government? Clearly, this could be looked at as a rebuke against tariffs.
I'll take the first part of that question is that the government is looking. There are within Congress now, both at the Senate and the Assembly, looking at the question, particularly as it relates to what they call critical products, critical materials, and particularly as it relates to PPE, that we had a huge dependency on China to source many of these products. And many times, particularly at the beginning of the COVID, there were restrictions out of China on certain things coming into us. So the government actually is taking a look at the critical infrastructure issues, critical products, and may propose legislation which will mandate that certain products be sourced either in more friendly or ally countries or back here in the United States. So that actually is being dealt with. And appreciate the fact that in the Trump administration, he went aggressively at China with the 232 and the 301 tariffs, which the Biden administration is continuing on with. So I think that the State Department and the Department of Commerce are trying to fight some of these issues that we see in China. And it's not just things controlled by their state, but you have an imbalance of trade, you have currency manipulation, you have intellectual property rights issues. I mean, there's really a whole laundry list of concerns that we have that the government is dealing with. Probably not as aggressively and as fast as most of us would like, but they are on the agenda and there are some actions being taken.
Very good.
I'll just note that there are other countries that are working to, let's say, lessen their exposure to China. For example, Japan is trying to relocate some of its manufacturing out of China, but not necessarily even a political issue. As a company, if all of your exposure is to manufacturers in one country, and not only from a political standpoint, but from a business standpoint, you would want to go ahead and mitigate some of that and find resources elsewhere. It's unfortunate. I deal with a lot of companies that want to bring stuff out of China right now. And I tell them, you could not pick a worse place in the world to try to bring something out of right now. And that's not necessarily a political decision, but it's a business decision. I mean, diversify your risk.
Right. We have in our company a silo in business, which is alternative sourcing. And in the last 20 years, we moved a lot of companies out of China, but certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, when President Trump took over and introduced the 301, 232 tariffs, we've moved a lot. And Sean, you mentioned Mexico earlier. We have actually moved a fair amount of companies into Mexico. If you get particularly into what's called the Maquiladora program, there are tremendous incentives relative to not only mitigating duties and taxes, but really eliminating them altogether and making for a more cost-effective landed cost on goods that are purchased around the world. So that becomes a viable option.
All right, next question. What PO system is used by Joe's Enterprise?
Well, I guess for a PO management platform, you've got several. You could have several decisions, depending on I guess your own IT department. If there are homegrown solutions, there are platforms you could. And if you're making a savings analysis, if you're an LCL importer, if you're make a savings analysis, figure out the ROI on that, it might make sense to do that. But the option that I went with, and I'll ask all my freight forwarder panelists to put their hands over their ears, is to leverage your freight dollar as much as possible. There are some pretty good freight forwarders out there that have very robust systems. The integration with the suppliers is seamless at that point. You're just talking about an integration of your own system with your freight forwarders, and usually doesn't cost you any more. And I will give a plug for Jason at Sparks Logistics, because he was my solution with that, and it's turned out to be a great investment both of our time, and we're looking to even further integrate that. So it's either build your own, pay for a software right off the shelf, or see what else is out there with your service providers.
Very good. Just a note for everyone, we continue to have questions coming in, and I know we're up against the 90-minute time frame here. Are all of you on the panelists ready to stay on for just a bit yet, or is there a hard stop that we need to curtail and end this?
Actually, you need to hard stop. But
I'm good. I can stay on for a bit. I can stay on for those 30 minutes. I'm still good.
I think we could stay on. You can continue on, Tom.
There may be a few of you who do have to leave, and I want to be respectful of that. And thank you for your contributions today. But with the number of questions coming on, obviously there are answers that would be helpful to those who are attending. So we'll move on to the next question.
Thank you.
And that is really something we've already addressed. Will ocean freight rates return to pre-pandemic / historic levels when volume, supply, demand balance all go back to normal? So maybe we've already answered that. It seems like it's going to be a bit yet.
I might just jump in.
I don't know if they'll ever go back.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think, I mean, we may see the the premium, the demand for premium, I think, is going to subside over time. But we're entering into a capacity managed environment, right? The top six ocean carriers control roughly, I think it's 72% of the global capacity, right? And they operate in 3 large vessel sharing agreements, or VSAs. So I think you can see very clearly, right? I use this example. If you think back to 2008, 2009 with the recession, and the demand fell off a cliff, right? And carriers bought market share, and we saw rates below $100 a container for a period of time, right? What we saw in March, when China went into lockdown and the demand, the volume disappeared literally overnight, is you saw 25% of the capacity came out instantaneously. And so you see now the carriers have the ability to artificially manage supply and demand as a way to ensure, really to almost protect them from themselves, right? And that's the nature of that asset-intensive organization. But I think you'll see that you'll see capacity continue to be managed very carefully, well past this year and well past next year. Because what's the incentive for the carrier to not do that any longer, right? They've made money. The last time they made money was 2010, until prior to last year. So I don't think I think we're going to see higher freight rates. And the one thing I'd also mention, I think, as we start looking, especially on the Asia eastbound contract season for next year, is I think one of the things we'll need to prepare for is mutual penalty clauses, right? So you don't show up with the freight, maybe you pay for it anyway, or you pay a significant premium for not delivering the cargo. So I think we're going to see some significant changes moving forward that we're just going to need to make the adjustment as a international shipping community.
Very good.
I think those are great points, Matt. Yeah. Just going to add real quick, I think that's something we're keeping a close eye on too, is how this impacts the next Trans-Pacific contract season, and whether that support of long-term rates is going to come back even at higher rates, or whether there's going to be more of a mix between long-term FAK, some form of premium or market-driven rate as well. So I just wanted to add that as part of it.
Very good. The next question is interesting. Any insights on moving hazardous materials, dangerous goods, either via LCO or LCL or CAO classes 6.1, 8, and 9? For recent LCL shipments being told hazmats being pushed in deference to other regular cargo.
So this is Tom Cook speaking. I think that, first of all, you need to find a service provider, a forwarder, or a broker that has the expertise in hazardous materials and has the relationships with the carriers that will be willing to carry it. Appreciate the fact that anything that needs customization is going to be pushed to the back of the line currently by the carriers, because they can move FAK freight now at a premium. So anything that requires special handling is going to be pushed to the back. So that's just a natural occurrence because of the disruption. But the key is to identify the service providers that have that expertise in hazardous materials and labeled cargo, and they in turn have the relationships with the carriers and the people at the carriers who have that expertise and are willing to move it. And that would be both by air, ocean, and also there's generally going to be a truck move from port or gateway to an origin or an end destination. So that would be critical. You have my email address. You're welcome to reach out to me. I can point you in some directions. I know of probably 4 or 5 forwarders and brokers that specialize in hazardous materials that might be of value for you to talk to.
Thank you, Tom. The next question is, any thoughts on discussing multi-year ocean contracts in the upcoming years?
Can I jump in there just for 1 second, if you don't mind, regarding the hazmat comment?
Yeah, sure, Mike.
We've, there's been a series of issues regarding hazmat cargo at various origins, in recent months. And I think everyone knows in years past, there's been some major fires in Tianjin and some other places. But most recently, there's been, 4 major fires coming out of Chinese ports, all containing hazardous cargo. So it's come under great scrutiny, not only from the ocean carriers, but export customs clearance situations, which I'm sure everyone's aware of on this call that's asking about hazmat. So we're seeing it really, to Tom's point, it's deprioritized, but now it's under tremendous scrutiny in terms of regulation, safety, and things of that nature that is making it very hard. Nobody wants hazmat cargo, or there's very few that want to take any hazmat cargo at the moment.
Thank you, Mike. Again, the question, any thoughts on discussing multi-year ocean contracts in upcoming years?
So Tom, this is Jim with FAG. We are talking about multi-year contracts. That's definitely out there, as is some of our competitors. So the one comment that was made earlier in regards to the rate levels being super high and what they signed with, let's say last year, the intention of the multi-year contract is to kind of find an in-between spot. So that is out there, and not just FAG Lloyd, and our competition is also doing it.
I have a sensibility that when we get through the Chinese New Year in 2022 and get into the contract season, that contracts are probably going to have escalation clauses galore in some of these contracts to allow the steamship lines, if they're offering something at a price, that they have a higher degree of control over bringing that price to a higher level if circumstances allow. So I would tend to believe that most of the carriers are going to try to put something in those contracts that allow them to escalate the price.
Very good,
I think
Tom.
one of the things to maybe take a look at moving forward would be to tie pricing to an index. It would be another avenue. I struggle with multi-year contracts because, and again, having been on the shipper side, if you sign at the height of the market and the market changes, I guarantee your senior management, who's not that involved in international logistics, is going to blame you for it and tell you don't know what you're doing. And most likely you're going to be under enormous pressure to break that deal regardless, right? And conversely, there's not a lot of value in being the lowest paying freight on the ship, because it typically, right or wrong, it typically is the first cargo that tends to get rolled, right? So I think that for me, the key is to look for ways to ensure your freight rates are competitive in the market, wherever that market is, right? And that you're getting access to capacity and consistency of service. And so one way to do that, or look at, or consider moving forward, would be to take a look at, and there are several, I think, quality freight indices out in the market where companies like Rollig and other forwarders are able to tie pricing or create a pricing mechanism where the rates increase or decrease based on a transparent index.
Very good, Matt. Thank you. So the next question is, how important is digitally transforming the supply chain currently? Do you see value of predictive analytics and visibility in the market today?
Yeah, this is a big area for us. This is Jason with Sparks. Technology has always been kind of a driver for us, and we've got a lot more demand in that area now. I think companies that felt as if they were kind of caught short and caught off guard in terms of inventory and supply chain concerns during the pandemic are rethinking their, I guess, kind of low-tech approach to visibility and looking at having more comprehensive and more predictive tools in place. So I know one of the big demands that we're getting lately is, we've always had a really good system for freight that we move and giving, good visibility and deep analytics for that. Now we're getting kind of a lot of demand for agnostic approach to that type of visibility, so that even if you're moving on a BCO contract or with multiple forwarders, you have the ability to have one system sitting over everything and giving you that kind of visibility. So to me, it's it seems to be a big topic these days, and I expect that it's going to continue to be as we see this market continue.
Very good. Thank you, Jason. Anybody else want to comment on that before I move on? Okay. The next question begins with a comment. There's been no mention of labor. The port dock workers are among the most powerful unions in the country. I recognize they have been hard hit by COVID, but the loading, unloading procedures are antiquated. Why is it an Amazon package can be tracked, but not an almond shipment from California to China. Our ports are not as automated as Hong Kong, Shanghai, Rotterdam, etc. We need to modernize. Any thoughts?
I think it's a legitimate issue. And I think that there are individual ports that are bringing technology into play. This new transportation infrastructure has money allocated to the development of the ports, and some of that money is going to be allocated to not only repair, deepening the ports, bringing in new equipment, but also bringing in technology and so forth. But it's a fair criticism. When you go to a port like Shanghai or Rotterdam, as two ports, and see how they're run as compared to going to the Port Elizabeth here in New York, or Long Beach or Los Angeles on the West Coast, or a port like Houston, is a big dramatic difference. We're just not run as efficiently and as correctly as possible. I'm not sure you're going to be able to fight the labor unions as strongly as you probably would like to, but I think that slowly, particularly with this transportation infrastructure bill, when money is put at it, it'll raise the efficiency and the use of technology to a greater extent. But it's a fair criticism. It has always been this way for a very, very long time, and it's going to take time to change it.
I do believe that the ILWU contract negotiations are up for renewal next year, if I'm not mistaken. So I think it's something that we'll all have to pay very close attention to. And I would expect it will be fairly contentious for the reasons described in the question.
In some of the trade magazines, Matt, it's already being proposed that the labor unions are posturing, for potential strikes to increase their bargaining position for obviously more benefits and more money. So I would expect that your word of contentiousness is a mild way of approaching it, but it's probably correct.
Maybe a bit understated. So
right.
Okay, the next question is, Sean mentioned relocating some suppliers to Mexico. Do you see large companies relocating manufacturing facilities to North America or finding new suppliers in North America? And I'll let you have a swing at that, panel, but I also have a comment.
Sure. So the thing that I think I mentioned earlier is that we, in my company, we have a specific silo division that just does alternative sourcing. And we're moving probably a dozen or more companies a year, and have now for more than 10 years, into Mexico. Mexico has a specific program called the Maquiladora. If you looked at the Fortune 1000 companies in the United States, more than 50% have a direct or an indirect interest in a company that's manufacturing or doing assembly work in the Maquiladora program in Mexico. It's a program designed between the U.S. government and the Mexican government to keep manufacturing on the Mexican side, so that it would also help deal with the immigration issue. But the idea is that you can have low-cost manufacturing done there, and substantial benefits relative to the cost of travel, the lead time required for ordering, the cost of transportation would be reduced, and then obviously the big benefit is the reduction or elimination of the duties and taxes that you'd pay when goods come in from other countries. And when you look at the 301 tariffs out of China, where you have a 25% surcharge, and you could now bring that down to zero, that makes a huge impact. So there's a lot of manufacturing that's moving not only out of China to Mexico, but also back here to North America. We've been successful now this year with moving 4 companies out of China into the United States, and not necessarily all of the manufacturing in China, but to diversify the supplier base to other countries. Vietnam is a big area that a lot of companies have moved to. Taiwan, Malaysia, India, Turkey are a number of other countries that provide favorable manufacturing as competition to China. So it's a big area of consideration.
Yeah, my comment would be, there's a gentleman I know here in the United States, Harry Mosier, who is leading an organization called Reshoring America, and he recently had an article that was out on LinkedIn showing a significant number of jobs created here in the US because of reshoring, and then also the nearshoring, which would be companies relocating out of China back to Mexico or even Canada. So I think it's definitely going to be increasing because of the heavier duties that are applied. Next question, can you speak to the possible rewrite of the Shipping Act?
You know, I don't see with so many other issues going on in Washington, I don't see this as something that is a consideration. Our new Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, does not have it on the agenda. He's been asked it by various parties that have vested interest in it. He is addressing with the FMC the issue of ocean carriers not honoring their contracts and also not honoring the movement of goods beyond the ocean gateways. But I just don't see that there's the bandwidth or I would say the interest level in Washington to deal with the Shipping Act, which is really the foundation of how carriers protect themselves from lawsuits and from being as responsible as they should be in the carriage of goods and merchandise. So I don't see it happening, not in the short term.
Very good. Another question, and I'm not certain exactly, but here we go. Will moving closer to the port help in drayage?
Yes, I think it will definitely.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. All right. Very good. Now we have a couple of questions in the chat as well. And so here we go. I'll try to get to some of those. Let's see. I'm an exporter from the USA to Asia. How can we address the inland costs since there is a shortage of containers and truckers?
Michael, how about you answering that question? No?
And that be there, Tom, just one thought, I mean, I'm going to speak for Hapag-Lloyd, we are matching up our imports on the inland side with exports. So Columbus, for example, we're surplus in Chicago, we're normally surplus in Minneapolis, and that's where we end up having capacity for empties going back to Asia. Other carriers do the same, but many carriers have just recently withdrawn from doing inland. That's not what Hapag-Lloyd is doing. So that would be maybe one source for the person who asked the question.
On the ocean freight side, my recommendation would be to really use the forwarders that specialize in that trade lane of the United States to China. Apex being one of them that clearly has that bandwidth and that capability, because they have the assets and they have that need because of their client base. And that would also apply on the air freight side. And then you have UPS being represented here, and companies like UPS and FedEx and DHL that control both the ground freight and the air freight side of it really become a very serious option because they already have that infrastructure in place. So on the air freight side, the integrated carriers, I think, are a definite option. And on the ocean freight side, companies that specialize or are based out of China, such as Apex, Jason mentioned Sparks Logistics, companies like that, they're the ones that I would go to because they've got a regular flow of business in that trade lane.
Very good. One final question that's come up. Is there a website for the Maquiladora program in Mexico to find possible suppliers? I would imagine they could go through commerce.
Yeah, you could go through your Department of Commerce. You could also go through the Mexican consulate that's located near your city or a major city. There's obviously one in Los Angeles. There's one in Dallas, Texas. There's one in New York City, in major cities. There's one in Chicago. Or you could just reach out to me and I could put you in contact with the responsible parties that can make those connections and so forth. But it's a very legitimate issue. And I would just throw into the equation is that in dealing with all the problems associated with the cost and the delays, there are other options that are available besides alternative sourcing. The use of foreign trade zones, the use of bonded warehousing, drawback programs, what we call tariff engineering of products are all other options that are available to companies to help mitigate their costs in the supply chain. And you're all welcome to reach out to me, and I can point you in different directions on how you get more information on any one of those subject matters.
Very good, Tom. I think that concludes all of the questions that we have. Again, I want to thank you as panelists for hanging with us and the 45 to 50 plus registrants who stuck with us for the additional 20 minutes. I think, again, this has been a very, very valuable program for all parties concerned. And I just want to say thank you to everyone again, and to those who are in attendance. September the 15th is our next national DEC program through the Education Committee. And with that, unless there are concluding remarks, I'll wish everybody a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Tom. Everybody be safe and well. We appreciate your participation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Take
Tom.
care, everybody.
Everyone.
Enjoy
Take
it.
care.
Thanks.
Bye.